Good afternoon, and welcome to Blockchain, Bots, and AI, oh my, leveraging 3 hot new technologies to streamline and advance your travel program. This webinar is brought to you by Business Travel Executive and our Going Deeper webinar series, and our sponsor today is Egencia. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Steinke, the VP of Global Travel Management for W Holdings. Today we have a great topic that I think has been on a lot of buyers' minds over the past few months, and it seems to be getting a lot of press and having a lot of uptick in conversation from the buyer's perspective, and we've also seen some interesting moves on the supplier side. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. I want to start first by thanking our sponsor for today's webinar, Egencia, Business Travel by Expedia. Egencia provides corporate travel management solutions that simplify even the most complex travel program, meeting your business needs and ensuring happy travelers. Egencia takes your business where it needs to go. Elevate your corporate travel program with the world's most relevant travel options, the same personalized travel experience across every touch point, and exceptional customer care for unexpected moments. Egencia transforms your corporate travel program, increasing savings and compliance. From the original digital travel management pioneer to today's leading business travel platform, Egencia is a business travel from Expedia Group. Connect with us to see the difference when business travel begins with you. So I'd like to thank Egencia to help make these webinars possible, and appreciate all of their support. So I'm going to hop right into things right now and get started. We've got a lot of content to cover. As I've already mentioned, I'm Jennifer Steinke, and I'm going to be moderating this webinar. And we're going to have some interaction with all of the 2 panelists that we've got today. So I'll be interjecting, asking questions. And I would encourage you to ask questions also. So I want to remind everyone that in your GoToWebinar panel that you've got on the right-hand side of your screen, probably, there's a chat box. Feel free to, questions box, excuse me. Feel free to pop in the questions, anything that you have in the questions box, and then we'll receive them as presenters, and you can ask questions all along during the webinar, and we'll also have time at the end of the webinar for questions. So with that in mind, let's get in and start talking about our panelists. So our first panelist today that's going to be talking about blockchain for us is John Packle. He has a great title as hardcore decentralization developer. So you guys can put that question in the first question box as to what that means. He works with Consensus. And you can see he's got a wide variety of experience, both on the travel side and sort of the development and technology side. So I want to welcome John to the panel, and we look forward to hearing from you all about blockchain. Our next panelist that we'll be having today is Johnny Thorson. He's a VP for Global Travel Strategy and Partnerships for Mezi. So Johnny and I have known each other for many, many years. He's been sort of a technology guru, I think, an advisor. Was the CEO of Contigo, which was bought by Concur. He's worked on multiple different advising for different technologies and stuff. So he's going to bring us some great perspective on sort of the concept of chatbots and AI and how they're applicable within the industry, along with, then the integration with blockchain and how it all works. So I think let's get started right into the conversation. And I want to start by asking John and Johnny, what is all this hype about? So we keep hearing that, all the answers are in AI or blockchain or chatbots, or we hear from buyers, I have no idea what these things are, but they sound really cool, but what's it going to be for me? So I'll start with John. Thinking about blockchain, chatbots, and AI, are these things really going to solve my problems as a buyer? Or are they going to come and go like we've seen so much innovation in the industry and we end up just going back to the same old way we do things? And on the flip side of that, John, is my role as a buyer going to become extinct? What are your thoughts?
Hey, Jen. So I think you personally will never go extinct, and I also don't think the buyers will. Most solutions, most problems don't have a silver bullet solution, and my view is that technology is never a complete silver bullet. Things are complex. At the same time, I do believe that blockchain is a paradigm shift. I think it's on the order of what we saw with the internet and the way that the internet and the World Wide Web impacted every industry, all aspects of social, political, business. So I do think that is coming. It's starting, as we'll talk about today. But as with the web, these things take time to ramify. As to whether it's a fad, there's definitely a lot of hype about blockchain. And I actually think that's good, because that's what big companies need to see in order to start investing in something and exploring it. And we've seen that in a huge way. And we'll talk about that a bit in the presentation. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Johnny, what are your thoughts? Am I going to become extinct?
I completely agree with John that you are not, but I think these three technologies are definitely going to impact the way you perform your job, and more importantly, I think what you spend your time on. So I actually think that in a few years' time, these three technologies would eliminate your top 5 pain points of today. And of course, the 5 pain points will vary by individual buyers and by the program they're running. But I think we're going to see a dramatic change in how you can solve problems, and more importantly, how reliable the solution is. The biggest problem in the travel industry for a long time has been the data quality and the lack of data sharing. And these new technologies are actually making it possible to solve data quality much more elegantly. And then as a result of that, you can do a lot of other things faster and more intelligently. So I really do believe when you look back at kind of your program in a few years' time and look at how you performed and work today, you'll say, how stupid was I? Why did I spend my time on these things? Because now I can be much more strategic and value creating. So I think it's a really exciting time. And buyers who don't want to change, they will probably become extinct, because there will be no room for them in this new environment. You need to understand the new skills and kind of capabilities that are coming.
That's great. So I completely agree with you, and I've been a big proponent of, from the travel buyer's perspective, saying, we have to be willing to evolve. We have to become more technically adapt, less, be willing to take maybe some more risks and do things differently in order to kind of evolve the industry as a whole and really make a difference in what is probably the most important thing of all, and that's the lives of our travelers, right? Because without them, and they're crying out for innovation in the industry right now, and they see what these technologies can do, and they want a better experience. So I think that's great, and I appreciate it. So we've got a lot to talk about today. There's a lot to cover, so we're going to get right into it. We're going to go over to John. So John, can you please tell us all about this crazy thing called blockchain and why we need to know about blockchain? And maybe for some of our audience, no one's ever heard the word, so help us understand exactly what it is, and then we'll go from there. So it's all yours, John.
Thanks. I'd be happy to. It's one of my favorite topics. So I want to start by saying that before we look at what blockchain is and how it might impact and is starting to impact the travel industry, to remember that there are virtually every industry, every vertical is looking at blockchain or has started to implement some solutions. So financial services was one of the first ones. So it's already a significant industry. One measure, you could look at the so-called market capitalization of all of the cryptocurrencies, which is now over $200 billion, although by the end of this talk, it could be up or down 10 or 20 billion. It's very volatile. But maybe more importantly, the billions of dollars that enterprises are pouring in, as well as governments, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, because they see the potential. Looking back at how the internet impacted industries and business models, people are seeing parallels here as well. Next slide. So speaking of crying out for change, as you mentioned, Jen, I think the travel industry, but specifically business travel and managed travel, really needs a paradigm shift. So, there's plenty of outdated legacy, technology. That's a picture of an early fax machine, which unfortunately we're still, using, and even, as the backdrop to some new technologies like virtual payments, where faxes have to be sent to hotels. There are a number of entrenched, middlemen and companies that I believe have historically impeded progress, particularly in terms of technology. So, the GDSs and I would say travel management companies that are not forward-looking, because companies and buyers are so tied in with their TMC, the technology they provide, things like profile, et cetera. And then there's also huge shifts coming, not only in the broader economy, and in payments and mobile payments, which are already starting to impact travel. Look at Airbnb and Uber and others, but also within the industry. So Marriott starting to talk about reducing or eliminating hotel commissions, and we saw the impact years ago of airlines eliminating or reducing commissions. So big things happening. So next slide. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail, but this is just to illustrate some of the headlines of startups and established companies that are exploring and in several cases actually using blockchain technology today, and a number of startups that are supporting them. Next slide. Maybe a delay. So don't get scared off by all the numbers and things on here. I'm not going to go into detail, but I put this here to make the point that blockchain technology is the result of decades of breakthroughs in computer science, and it's a unique combination of some key components that are in use today in a lot of different things. So public key cryptography is used, if you use one of those, fobs to get a code to log into your company's, computer systems. So there's a variety of things that this is built on.
So John, I have a question for you. Can you if I want to get into the blockchain, which I'm not sure I completely understand how, I think I have a good understanding of it, but maybe some of our audience doesn't. But do I need to hire like blockchain engineers? Are there people that, can help us with this, or how does it work? And maybe you're going to talk a little bit about, the actual function of blockchain, but it seems like as a travel or procurement manager, this goes way over my head.
Right. Yeah, and so I would say no. I don't think you're going to be hiring engineers. I think having a basic understanding of this, and my goal here would be to get people excited about the possibilities, so that they're open to conversations that I'm sure are starting to happen in their IT departments. So in a few minutes, we'll talk about smart contracts and some ways that I believe products will start to come out, including one that I'm working on for buyers and for travel managers to leverage this technology. So this slide is illustrating some of the key components of blockchains, and the main point being is that they represent a layer of trust where we can not rely on those middlemen that we talked about earlier. So in the same way that Bitcoin, which was the first instance of a blockchain and invented the blockchain technology, in the same way that Bitcoin allows us to transfer value between people, essentially peer-to-peer, without a government issuing the currency and without a bank or several banks maintaining a ledger of who has what balance, that kind of infrastructure can be used in many other ways.
Hey, John, I have a question about this. So basically is what you're telling us is that information that's stored in the blockchain kind of stays in that block forever until a new block of information replaces it. Is that at its primal definition sort of how it works? And I have to be the one person that can open up that piece of information, so sort of keeps everybody honest. So is that the concept?
Yeah, that's definitely a key concept is keeping everybody honest through having a layer, a foundational technology that where information is immutable, so that we're not relying on somebody to tell us that something is accurate. Anyone can audit or take a look and see.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so these next few slides will get into a little bit more of some examples of how that can work. So the next one, all right, so I think the key point here is that there are several blockchains that allow the use of what we call smart contracts. So in the same way that Bitcoin allows the transfer of value, blockchains like Ethereum allow us to create agreements and business logic. You can see in the bottom left various different essentially applications that can be stored in this trust layer and be guaranteed to run and work every time that they are activated.
So John, does that mean, so another question has just come in, sorry to interrupt, but so could blockchain be used as like a form of payment for travel expenses?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So one key point is that you can separate the payment aspect from the underlying technology. So an analogy would be, when the internet and the web came out, email was considered sort of the first killer app, but the web had a lot of other potential and different things. So you can use the technology, and people are starting to use the technology to essentially keep track of things and keep people on the same page without involving any payment. But when you do want to involve payment, it's native to the system. It's built in contrast to the internet and the web, where early developers tried to build in payments and essentially the banks refused at the time.
Okay, so and I think you're going to share with us other ways outside of payments that can be used in the actual corporate travel space, because it was very intriguing for our audience.
Yeah. So here's one. So this isn't just a theoretical example. There are two companies at least who are offering trip cancellation insurance through smart contracts. So one of the largest insurance companies in the world, AXA, has this, and there's a startup called Etherisk that has a variety of different forms of insurance. So what this is illustrating is that you can set conditions like we have on the left there in the box that get expressed in code. So on the right is what we call pseudocode. It's kind of taking the logic of something, and then that gets translated into computer code. This code being inserted into the blockchain is what smart contracts allow us to do, to be able to guarantee that something is going to happen. So instead of waiting for the insurance to be paid out, or trusting that the company is going to do it, you're able to actually see that it happens automatically. So there are literally hundreds of use cases that people have come up with for smart contracts and blockchain. Well over 100 that are in use in production now. These are some key areas. So I'll highlight just two of them. So in the upper left, supply chain, literally trillions of dollars tied up in companies' supply chains when they're tracking the movement of goods from production all the way to sale. So being able to better understand where something is and address it if there are issues is super valuable, and that's something that was an example that our company did, where fish was tracked from the moment that it was caught in the ocean all the way through transport with FedEx in this case to a conference that we had, and we served sushi to the guests, so someone could verify exactly where it came from and where it went. The lower right, the energy, there's a company that's using smart contracts to better manage homeowners' energy usage, and there will be applications in the future to be able to automatically buy and then sell energy if you have the solar panels based on certain algorithms. So the next slide. So now let's talk more specifically about how blockchain can be used and is being used in travel. So there are a lot of different areas. These are 8 sort of concepts or areas that people are either talking about or implementing some solutions. And you see that there are themes here like transparency that gets back to that fact that it's the trust layer and it's immutable. Settlement where, again, like is starting to happen in financial services, you can have much faster, much more accurate settlement that could include payment as well. Loyalty is another area where a number of companies, airlines and others, are looking at blockchain applications. So the next slide. So to talk a little bit more in detail, there's a large consulting company, one of the largest ones, estimated that in financial services industry, they could save $20 billion a year in process improvements through blockchain. And there's a travel company, TUI, that it's estimated that their company alone could save up to $100 million or 100 million euros a year through extension of some things that they're working on now. So a lot of this has to do with the ways that we can eliminate what I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced, the amount of manual work that goes into some of our processes in travel, such as hotel contracts and rates being loaded and commissions, etc. And there's even scenarios where expense reporting could essentially go away, at least from the standpoint of the traveler, where everything would be automated and tracked and done so much better than today. So, and then identity is another key area. Obviously, it's important to every industry, and anything online, you need to identify and authenticate the user. But in travel, it's even more important, because it could be the difference between somebody getting on a plane or not. The data flowing through travel. So we all know that the challenges with the PNR and that the data, the underlying technology of the GDSs that really prevents us from doing a lot of other things that we could be doing with traveler and trip data. So there's a number of ways that smart contracts and blockchain can improve this and reduce the amount of information that needs to be included. So there are a lot of transactions in travel that don't need all of that data that's in the PNR, the person's name, address, phone number, all kinds of things. So with this technology, we can be much more selective about what gets disclosed and when. So to talk about some more specific cases, a number of people and companies who are working on blockchain applications in travel have identified the hotel space as really ripe for disruption and for products. So if you think about the process that particularly larger companies go through in negotiating, in some cases, hundreds of contracts with hotels, which requires months of data gathering and trying to determine accurate data, and then those details are loaded into distribution and reservation systems, but 20 to 30% of the time something goes wrong with that rate loading, and the travelers aren't getting the right rate or amenities included and things like that. So there are definitely not just opportunities, but a number of companies who are working on solutions in this space. Dynamic discounts. A number of these things are areas where, because of the nature of the smart contract, you could program in dynamic discounts that automatically apply based on the volume that's seen, rather than having to go through a longer cycle of collecting data, renegotiating, and re-implementing.
So John, I have a question for you here. So what you're saying, what I understand is, through the blockchain, travel managers would be able to have better control of the contracts that they're entering into, ensuring that they are accurate, and if they're not, then they can address that, right? But also to give it some more, the ability to dynamically control, well, in layman's terms, sort of the sourcing and the application of those contracts based on volumes and things like that. Am I getting that right? I want to make sure our audience understands the truly impact that these could have.
Yeah, exactly. So, one thing I see is the ability to reduce the cycle. So if you think of, again, like the annual hotel contracting process, if you had more accurate data and had it in closer to real time, you could change your terms, and if you had the ability to change the terms based on the actual volume that's occurring as opposed to just what was projected, then both parties, the transaction can benefit.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
So finally, just wanted to mention some what I think are really exciting existing efforts, in the space. So Microsoft and WebJet, that's one of the earliest partnerships for blockchain and travel. And WebJet has successfully used blockchain to track hotel inventory between its different internal properties, and they've seen savings by increasing the accuracy of those and tracking better. And now they're starting to make some of these available to their outside partners. Winding Tree is, perhaps the most ambitious project in the space. One way to look at what they're doing is, could potentially or eventually be an alternative to the GDSs. They're creating a new data and technology layer for the travel industry. So, as you can see there, they've got some big name partners, airlines and hotel groups, who not only participated in the fundraise that the startup did, a token launch, but are now actively building solutions on this foundation that Winding Tree is created using smart contracts, using Ethereum. So they had a hackathon 2 weeks ago where 100 developers from airlines and other travel companies were participating, and actually came out after 3 days with some working solutions tying in, for example, these airline reservation systems with this new underlying layer. So super exciting. I think important for people to keep their eyes on the space, and I know that you'll see more and more in the coming months and years. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, John. So it's, from my perspective as a buyer, obviously I want to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening here, but I'm very intrigued on the concept of, especially the smart contracts piece of it, kind of keeping our vendors honest, keeping, rates doing what they're supposed to be doing, and being able to control my volume. So I think for our audience, there's probably a lot of people going, how can I use this? Well, I think those are two areas where certainly there's a lot of opportunity. So great insight. Thank you so much. So Johnny, let's talk about AI chatbots and this perfect marriage thing. So tell me, from your perspective, why is this a perfect marriage, and what is this really going to do for a managed travel program? Because I think we hear a lot about it, and I wonder if there's a lot of fluff on the outside. You can put a pretty wrapper on something, make it look good, and say it's AI chatbots and all of that, but is that really what's happening? Is there a person behind, somebody, the wizard behind the curtain or whatever, kind of making it all happen? So if you can share with us sort of your thoughts on that, and kind of why you think it's a perfect marriage in the travel space.
Absolutely, Jen. And, also perfect kind of setup from John, right? Because what you just heard about on the blockchain front, now kind of put that into the back of your mind. And even though it's hard, just assume that in a few years' time, this emerging technology will have matured enough to give us some brand new capabilities that simply cannot be put into the old solutions. Now, what do we do with that? First of all, the reason AI and chatbots are so perfectly aligned is that a chatbot needs a lot of data before you can actually generate any form of AI. Artificial intelligence literally is IT speak for when we have enough data to assume something in advance of an event happening. And what do we have in travel? Well, we have an insane amount of data. Sadly, it's not really been kind of positioned in a way where it can be used for much. And it's funny, over the last few days before this call, I actually did a little exercise myself. I tried to find out how many days of travel I've had in my entire work career. There's no way of finding out, even though I know that all my bookings exist. I am there, but I cannot get to it. With the new environment, and especially with blockchain, right, we're getting better platforms for managing large amount of data with trust included. And as we evolve, more and more data will become available, and that will accelerate AI. Secondly, your question about, what's automated, what's not. Well, if you put an AI chatbot to work, it will know nothing at the beginning of its work life. It only generates knowledge as it starts learning from doing. And the good thing about travel is it is a highly repetitive process. we keep doing things over and over. And it is ironic, again, if you think of yourself as a traveler, how many times you've gone into the booking engine and done the same. But there's very little being captured that helps automating the way you do it. When I look at a booking engine today, it's almost the same workflow as back when I joined GetThere in the late 90s. And as a timeline indicator, right, the booking engines arrived about 4 years after the internet became visible. So I think we're going to see a shorter gap between blockchain and new solutions, but that's what you should look at. Finally,
so Johnny, I have a question for you. Oh, sorry, Johnny. Sorry to interrupt you, but I have a quick question for you. So you talk a lot about the data. So if I'm a travel buyer and I don't have a really good data strategy right now, and I don't have a lot of data that I have access to, or I have so much data I don't know what the heck to do with it. Like, how would I get the data so that the AI could be smarter? Because AI has to have data to be intelligent, and then it learns more from more data that it gets. So, am I kind of at a loss if I don't have a ton of data to help the artificial intelligence do its thing?
I would say yes, and start looking at your current procurement contracts for travel technology, and if they don't, then make sure that in the future, in the next iteration, they include a paragraph that outright says that any data generated from this particular piece of technology belongs to you. It's available for you to consume and make available for other solutions. Do not accept that these bookings were made in my booking engine and therefore it's my data. It's the other way around, right? You allowed somebody to deliver service to you and you paid for that, but it's definitely your data and should be 100%. Because that's where the chatbot comes in. If you have enough data available for the bot to kind of learn from before you start, you're actually already halfway there. If you could pump 2 years of booking data into a chatbot environment, it could in theory generate your travel policy as it really is, not what it says, but what it is, because it can extract the patterns from the data and say, this is what you do. So why don't we start there as your policy going forward? Another thing the chatbot technology can do better than any human is simply find data patterns. It can see what do you always do when you start doing something, or why do you always book premium economy on a Monday but not on a Wednesday? Whatever the pattern is, the chatbot will find it and be able to apply it. And that's really how travelers will expect service to be delivered in the future. A travel program just for me. It's no longer one program for all travelers. It's one-to-one. And that will be delivered by this digital travel assistant.
Yeah.
Yep, I know you are, Jen. And, think back to what you and I talked about 7-8 years ago in the Contigo kind of US food states. We talked about it then. Nothing really has happened since. But now we finally have the technologies to do something. So if you look at where we are right now, and I'm not promoting any particular solutions here, but in the broader landscape, I kind of have identified between 10 and 15 current AI chatbot solutions. Most of them are in early stage, meaning they're certainly not doing everything, but they typically do one thing very well. Some of them are evolving to doing multiple things, and it's only a matter of time and data before they will do a lot of things extremely well. If you look at adoption rate, measured against the corporate travel kind of managed travel program in total, we're definitely below 5%, and we should be at this stage. But I don't think it's going to take us 10 years to get to 80%. So it'll be a much faster adoption than what we saw with the booking engines, because it's such a powerful user experience that travelers will divert. So if you put yourself in a mindset of, within 5-7 years, most of my program will go into this. That's where you should be looking ahead. And how does the bot work? Well, it all starts with a conversation, right? And the conversation can be me writing to a bot, and then it's actually a human travel expert behind writing back to me. Or it can be fully automated software trying to understand everything I do, or it can be a hybrid where, it's something in between. The bot will try to find out what you're doing, the so-called intent gathering, because if it doesn't know what you want to do, it cannot help you. An example of that is if I go to New York and I need a hotel room, that's easy. But if I am a millennial and I need a place to crash, a booking engine today will not understand that term. But it's very easy for a bot to learn that when Joe or Mary says place to crash, they actually mean hotel. So the intent gathering is one-to-one. It's each individual way of conversing in a channel. Once intent is found, then the chatbot can do what it's best at. It can go through data options, and then comes the magic point. It can literally say, I don't want to give you 20 to 50 irrelevant options. I know what you normally do. I'm only going to give you 3 or maximum 5, because this is what I know you will choose from. And just put that into your mindset for a moment. How do we search today? Typically in many places, spending a lot of time and looking at a lot of solutions. Once you trust a chatbot, that's the only place you will go. There will be very little option for kind of vendors to break into this when the bot knows what I want to do. So it's a whole new landscape in terms of kind of content management and marketing communication. Because whenever I choose from the option I've been given, that's instantly stored as another layer of knowledge for my bot to understand when I come back next time. And in reality, I think by end of next year, we should be able to say, hey, book my normal trip to Chicago for a 2-day trip starting on the 3rd of December. The bot should know everything about me if that is a regular occurring trip. I don't even want to spend a minute. I'm just waiting for my confirmation email to arrive, or my message in the bot, or whichever channel I prefer for communication. That's where we're going. And it actually means we will no longer spend time in a user interface searching and looking and manipulating searches. We will just trust the bot. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at kind of what's in the landscape today and how it works as we sit here by the end of 2018. And I'm using Messi's kind of environment purely because I can talk from these data points. Most of the other startups right now do not really want to share details, which is fair enough. But first of all, a chatbot for travel is not one piece of software. It's actually a constant evolving array of small pieces of software, so-called microservices pieces, that are designed to do only one thing extremely well. And all this rolls into the user interface that I, the traveler, kind of converse in. So I can use forms, so-called microforms, or I can use free conversation saying, I am going to New York on Monday. Whichever way I interact, the bot will then activate the right pieces of software underneath and go and find the information that is applying to this particular conversation. Behind the scenes, in the Messi case, the bot will constantly have the option to ask for help from a real travel expert, a traditional travel consultant. If it doesn't feel confident enough about, I know what you want to do, I can help you. So that confidence score can vary by customer, by traveler, by solution. There are different ways of kind of managing this, but that's one of the key capabilities of the future. How good is the bot at identifying what you want to do and act on it? And just for curiosity, right, if a new form of payment suddenly arrived next week in a bot environment, you just add that piece of payment. There's no change of user interface. There's no big development of an old clunky solution. You'll have it ready as soon as you can connect to the new API and activate that payment form. I don't need to know. I don't need to see it. It's done behind the scenes. And you can add, we call it, miscellaneous bots. So in the Messi world, we actually have a flower bot that will make it easy for travelers to order flowers if that's of interest for the customer. There's no end to the bot service you can apply and make available in this framework. And the speed of development is therefore a lot faster than what we've been seeing with the traditional booking engine environment. We're talking days here, not months or years. And I said, you can decide how you want to look at this, but what's important in a hybrid bot environment is that whatever you are seeing on the phone, in the chat interface, in the mobile app, a consultant is also able to see behind the scenes in a dashboard-like environment. So here you see an example. The blue boxes are message-generated conversation, and it truly is natural language conversation. It is not click yes, no, or call. It's true messages with long options and kind of words and conversations included. And the conversation is not random. It's actually matched to your conversation style. So if you use one emoji per 10 words, the bot will do the same. If you always end with 3 emojis of a certain type, the bot will do the same, because it's just data that it's analyzing and consuming and applying. No human agent have the time or ability to do that. They cannot find and remember these patterns, but the bot can. Whenever an agent steps in, they can take over the conversation, and they immediately on the right see this is the traveler you are talking to, along with a very different profile. We call it the travel DNA. That's about your conversation style, your decision-making pattern, how many times you search before you normally book, total lifetime retail value of your travel buying. All that information is available instantly when you select a conversation. So again, completely different work environment on the agent side. They are no longer in any form of blue screen or GDS limited environment. It's a true retail commerce platform. Next slide, please. So, 4 key values for me as an end user that really drives conversion. First of all, this is all about me. I no longer feel that, I'm plugged into this weird booking engine because it happens to have some rules that apply to a lot of other people, but not to me. Here, I feel that whatever I'm doing, it's all about me, and it knows me and understands me and literally talks to me. Secondly, and that's just high user value, I'm no longer asked to restart just because somebody calls me and interrupts my travel search. Today, if I'm too slow on a booking engine, I'm basically being told, hey, you're timed out. Go back to start, and by the way, do everything again that you just did before, because I don't know what you did. I'm not built for that. In a bot channel, everything has remained, and you can just come back in 2 hours after you started and continue. And as I said, it is your single channel for everything. You can ask the impossible, because if the bot does not know what to do, an agent will step in and take over. And as you experience that everything in one place instead of jumping between channels, you only go there. You are not going back to a broken, fragmented, multi-channel world. Why would you? And that leads to the 4th value point, where we only just starting, help me doing my trip based on what you know about me. I don't want a random, airline engine that actually knows nothing about my behavior when I leave the airport. I want a complete digital assistant engine helping me step by step. So I think we're going to claw back knowledge from the kind of supplier sides and put it into these independent standalone services that truly are agnostic, because they're not driven by upselling or revenue generation or anything else. They're driven to meet my needs and nothing else. Next slide, please. So as the bot kind of evolves, it needs to learn, right? And if you just click one more time, Jen, there should be another piece appearing. Yeah. And as I said, it's all about intent gathering. Whenever the bot converses, it tries to understand what you want to do. And if it cannot understand, it will ask for help. And an agent will step in and complete this so-called intent form. We call it AI training. And we've actually seen a few instances where traditional call center agents are now referring to themselves as AI trainers, because that's what they're now focusing their time on. So they help the bot understand what it should do when it does not know what to do. Completely new skill, right? But it also means you can now become a fantastic CRM kind of manager. You're managing an array of service bots out there rather than sitting doing stupid transactions yourself. Next slide. So this is a high-level overview of some of the players in the marketplace right now. The names above the dotted line are chatbots focusing on booking capabilities, either for suppliers or for kind of the corporate travel / consumer travel world. And we're going to see a very quick development in these players. There was a big announcement yesterday around Lola, where American Express, GPT, have kind of made a 5-year deal with Lola, where they will now promote that technology to their customers, which is an interesting development. Messi, where I live my life, were acquired by American Express Card earlier this year. The other players are all out there pushing different strategies, and they are there. Take a look at them. The players below the dotted line are applying AI in other areas than kind of booking and search. So they're optimizing completely programs or delivering entire new capabilities using AI and kind of big data capabilities. So this is a landscape full of new players that you will need to follow and look at as the market evolves. Next slide. And if you consolidate kind of everything you've heard from both John and me, this is a new phase starting. You can no longer afford to say, I don't have time to look at how I can become smarter because my program works and there's not really anything new. My booking engine is the same. My RFP process is the same. Yeah, that's been true for 10, 15 years, but it will not be true anymore. You need to get yourself into a mindset and, more importantly, a political environment where you can make quick decisions and test products quickly. And you're not talking about changing your global program. You're talking about picking a few hundred travelers, perhaps, and put them onto something new. Get the CFO blessing, because if you don't, you're stuck with a dinosaur solution that will become worse and worse compared to traveler expectations. We can no longer, improve 5% per year. It's not enough. You're going to be left at a very dead car park in a desert somewhere. You need to really dramatically change what you do. And that normally starts with applying something completely new. So, as a buyer, this is a fantastic opportunity to take advantage of blockchain and AI and chatbot technologies and make yourself much more visible and, meaningful inside the corporate travel program and the corporate in general. Fantastic times ahead.
Thanks, Johnny. So I love all this innovation. I think it's great. I think the combination of understanding more about blockchain, how it can affect the buyers, and what we can do with AI and chatbots, I think is incredible. But I'd like to ask you a question. As a buyer, through these tools, am I giving up control, or am I getting more control in my travel program? What are your thoughts?
I would definitely say you're getting much more control, because you will now be deciding a number of things that you literally had no influence over today. So in my view, you're getting a lot more control if you want to have it.
Great. So I want to remind everyone, we're coming down to the last 6 minutes of our webinar. If you have any questions, please put them in the questions box. We have a couple that have come through, and I'm going to ask them to start with John. Just a couple questions about blockchain, and I want to start with a question about airline distribution. Can you kind of talk about how airline distribution could be impacted with the use of blockchain?
Sure. So the Winding Tree platform I mentioned allows air, hotel, other content providers to contribute their inventory directly and to this platform, this trust layer that's built on 2018 technology. So the same way that the web allowed hundreds of startups to create apps for travel, this Winding Tree platform, and I imagine others, will arrive that are similar. And blockchain, I think, will encourage an explosion of innovation. So that doesn't mean that the GDSs will go extinct, but it does mean that they will need to adapt and improve as there are alternatives that are more and more viable.
Great, thank you. Johnny, question for you. Taking into consideration blockchain, AI, chatbots, all of the things we've talked about today, what do you really see the role of the TMC being in the future?
That's an interesting question, right? I really think they're going to have to evolve into being technology administrators, call them integrators, as we've done in the traditional corporate enterprise software world. They will be responsible for making the technology work, or they literally have to become technology companies who happen to focus on travel. Most software companies that build accounting systems, they don't really do accounting services. They just build the software. And I think that's where we're going to see the landscape dramatically changing. Sadly, a lot of TMCs will not be able to kind of compete against these new kind of service platforms because they're simply so much better. And therefore, if you're not able to move quickly and take advantage, you are really in a danger zone. And that's really the final interesting thought. I actually think small and mid-sized TMCs, for the first time in a while, have a big advantage. They can move a lot faster into this new world if they want to. The bigger guys, they have so much infrastructure and legacy that it's going to be hard. There's no way around it. And that's why, yesterday's announcement with Lola is a great example. They simply decided not to build it themselves. Small to mid-sized TMCs, this is a golden opportunity window for you.
Interesting. Great. No, great perspective. One more question for John. So come from the audience, regarding dynamic hotels, if we negotiate a percentage of discount with a hotel, how does that play into revenue management of the hotel, closing out that inventory? So obviously a lot of contracts, are, last term availability or not last term availability. I mean, how would the blockchain help with that at all?
Yeah, I think it will, because with these smart contracts, you'll be able to have agreements that are based on actual volume. So whereas today the buyer is projecting room nights, promising room nights, you'll be able to negotiate, say, volume discounts that kick in at different levels, and those discounts, greater discounts, will be applied immediately as those levels are reached. So there's also another really interesting thing that that company TUI I mentioned on a slide is talking about is the possibility of taking hotel rooms, so taking the inventory and tying it to a token on a blockchain and essentially creating a marketplace for trading this inventory. So a hotel revenue manager could, experiment with giving a block of rooms into this marketplace, as opposed to, in the U.S. the duopoly of the OTAs.
Interesting.
So, Jen, can I just add a comment? I was at an airline conference recently, and Air Canada did this publicly, so I'll quote them. Right, the head of distribution from Air Canada literally said on stage and said his goal with blockchain was that when it was all ready, the GDSs would pay Air Canada for the ability to sell their seats. Now that's true disruption, right? That's thinking outside the box. It's not about reducing the cost. It's about making money from the GDSs. I love that thought.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. So we've come to the end of our time. First, I would love to thank John and Johnny for bringing us some great insight into all this new technology and that's going to be available to us now and in the future. Thank you so much for your perspectives. They're big topics, and Business Travel Executive Magazine certainly wants to continue the conversation. Moving on, we'll be having a follow-up story in our January issue about these particular topics. I'd also like to really sincerely thank Egencia for being our webinar sponsor today. This PowerPoint presentation, the deck itself, and a recording of this webinar will be available. You'll all get an email with a link within 48 hours to the actual recording. If you found this interesting and want to share it with your industry colleagues on the businesstravelexecutive.com website, the whole webinar, the recording and everything will be posted there for others to read. So thank you so much for all of your time. We appreciate it. We know you're busy. John and Johnny, thank you again. And I'd like to, at this point, wish everyone happy holidays. We're getting into that season, and I hope you found some great insight into our webinar today. So thanks again for attending.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you very much, Tim.